Why is the world so obsessed with her? Most people see a tragic accident or a monster behind the wheel. But as a clinician, when I look at the Mackenzie Shirilla case, I see the most terrifying psychological phenomenon a human can ever encounter. That's the void of incongruence. It's the chilling moment where what you see on the surface, the tears, the tributes, the grieving girlfriend post, completely fails to align with the forensic reality of 100-mile-per-hour impact into the wall. It's a crash that killed 2 people. Our brains are biologically wired to solve this puzzle. That's why we're glued to it. That's why we watch the Netflix series. That's why we watch so many videos on this case. We literally can't look away because we're trying to reconcile the human face with the inhuman act. As a licensed professional counselor, when I look at the footage, when I look at the case, I don't just see a girl who simply lost control of a vehicle. I see a textbook example of what I call malignant entitlement. It's a psychological state where the reality and my needs are the only ones that exist, even if it costs the lives of those I claim to love. Today, we're going to peel back the grief mask that she wore for months and see exactly where the psychology of a killer was hiding in plain sight. We're looking for the tells that the cameras caught, but her social media tried to hide. Her persona tried to hide it. But why does this matter to you? Because the Mackenzie Shirilla case isn't just a headline. It's not just a Netflix series. It's a case study in the human deception. By the end of this video, you'll discover the 3 psychological markers that turned this from a local tragedy into a global obsession. These are the same markers that will help you identify when someone in your own world is performing an emotion rather than actually feeling it. It's about learning to trust your gut when the mask doesn't fit the face. I'm John Cordray, a licensed professional counselor since 2007. I spent nearly 2 decades helping people navigate the complexities of the human mind. So let's dive into this clinical file together. To understand why she drove her car into a wall at 100 miles per hour, we have to look at the developmental arrest that occurred long before that night. In clinical terms, we're looking at what happens when a young person's ego is allowed to grow without the pruning of consequences. When a person is never forced to face the small ripples of their behavior, the outbursts, the manipulation, the digital threats, their brains begin to wire for a very specific kind of omnipotence. They don't just feel above the law, they feel above reality itself. This is the origin of the Hell's on Wheels mindset. It isn't just an edgy social media handle, it's a clinical declaration of a God complex, where the individual believes they can dictate life and death without the interference of gravity or of justice. But a God complex needs a stage. And for Mackenzie, that stage was her relationship with Dominic. We see a pattern of relational volatility. It's an all-or-nothing attachment style where love is actually indistinguishable from possession. As a therapist, I look at the history of their arguments and the threats of self-harm used as leverage. In a healthy mind, a car is a tool for transportation. In a mind stunted by developmental arrest, the car becomes an instrument of absolute control. She wasn't just trying to end her life. She was trying to fix a relationship dynamic the only way her arrested development knew how, by ensuring that if she couldn't control him in life, she would control the exact moment of his death. It was the ultimate and final temper tantrum of a God complex. When we look at the Hell on Wheels persona, we aren't just looking at a teenager being edgy. From a clinical perspective, we're observing the failure of the prefrontal cortex to override the limbic system's demand for immediate emotional release. In Mackenzie's case, it wasn't a slow burn plan. It was a limbic hijack. In psychology, we talk about a term called temporal myopia. It's the inability to see the future consequences of a current emotional impulse. To Mackenzie, the 100-mile-an-hour impact wasn't a death sentence. It was just a momentary solution to a relational conflict. When a personality is shaped by a pathological ego, the brain literally filters out the lethality of an action because the ego believes it's the protagonist of a story that can't end. She wasn't just driving a car. She was driving a narrative where she was the only one who could decide when the scene was over. When you combine a lack of empathy with a total absence of consequence-based learning, you get a personality that can look at a grieving mother and feel nothing. Because in their world, only one person truly exists. Hey friends, if you want to understand the deep-seated why behind the what in these complex cases, I want you to consider joining the channel as a member mega fan, and you'll get some special perks. Take a look. The first reason the world is obsessed with this case is the digital mask. We saw Mackenzie's posting heartbreak emojis and I miss you tributes to Dominic after she drove him into a wall. In my field, we call this extreme impression management. But why does this go so viral? Because it creates a massive cognitive dissonance for the viewer. Our brains literally struggle to compute how a person can curate a grieving persona from a victim they just executed. We weren't just watching a trial. We're trying to solve a psychological puzzle. How can a human being be this incongruent? It's that obsession is actually our own survival instinct trying to understand a threat that looks like a normal teenager. One of the most unsettling aspects of her trial was her behavior at the defense table, which clinicians often identify as social mimicry. If you watch the way that she looks at her attorneys or the gallery before she reacts, this is often a sign of low affective empathy paired with high cognitive empathy. She doesn't just feel what the families feel. That's low affective empathy. But she is smart enough to know what grief is supposed to look like. That's high cognitive empathy. She's scanning for a script. When she cries at the sentencing, it isn't a spontaneous eruption of remorse. It's a regressive defense mechanism. By making those high-pitched, childlike sounds, she is unconsciously trying to trigger a caregiving response in the judge and anyone else who will listen. It's an attempt to revert to the helpless child status to avoid the adult accountability of a murder conviction. I also want to address the digital mask that was so vital to her. This case actually touches on elements of a much darker psychology called the dark triad. There are three main components of the dark triad, but in this case, Mackenzie specifically demonstrated two of the three of the dark triad, narcissism and Machiavellianism. For Mackenzie, her social media wasn't just a place to post photos. It was a tool for narrative control. By posting those tributes to Dominic, she was engaging in a postmortem impression management. She was attempting to gaslight the public record before it was even written. The obsession the world feels comes from our own brain's detection of a parasocial predation. We feel like we are being lied to through the screen. And we are, and we were. She was using the digital space to manufacture a soulmate narrative that would make the forensic reality of her executioner role seem impossible. She's just a teenager who was crying, who was mourning, who was grieving her love. Or was she? It was the ultimate form of psychological shielding, using the memory of the victim to protect the image of the perpetrator. Then we have the "I don't remember" defense. During the trial, Mackenzie claimed a total blank on the moments leading up to the crash. It's pretty convenient. As an LPC, I look at two very specific but different possibilities here. One is post-traumatic disassociation. The other, tactical malingering. True dissociation is the brain's way of protecting itself from a trauma it can't process. But tactical malingering is a deliberate performance of memory loss to avoid accountability. If you can't remember, you can't take accountability. The world is obsessed with this because our collective human lie detector. We know now that the high-speed data shows that she never even hit the brakes. And our intuition screams that her memory loss is actually a clinical shield used to protect the mask we just talked about earlier. This brings us to the climax of the obsession, the sentencing. This is where we see the affective incongruence at its peak. You see her high-pitched, almost childlike wailing, a sound meant to signal extreme distress. But then look at her eyes. Contrast that sound with the cold, calculating stare she gives the families. She isn't crying for the lives lost. She's crying for the life she is losing. It's a performance of victimhood by a person who is biologically incapable of feeling the weight of her own actions in the moment. It's jarring. It's uncomfortable. And it's why we can't stop hitting the replay. We watch it. We watch many videos. We watch the Netflix. There's a reason for that. We can't look away. But there is one specific sentence that she said to the judge during her final statement that reveals the true core of her personality. And it's not what you think. It wasn't an apology. It was a psychological tell that confirms everything that I've discussed. You're finding these clinical breakdowns helpful and it's giving you a new perspective and a new way of looking at cases like this. Hit the like button and karate chop the subscribe button. I know that's a little corny. Now we have to realize that we're not obsessed with Mackenzie Shirilla simply because she's a monster or a big headline. We're obsessed because she represents the modern mask. We have to look at the identity diffusion present here. Mackenzie didn't just seem to have the stable core self. She had a collection of masks. One day, she is the hell-on-wheels rebel. The next, she is a devoted, grieving girlfriend. And the next, she is a terrified child in court. Do you see those three stages that literally changed the mask right before our eyes? When a person lacks a stable identity, they become a mirror personality, reflecting whatever emotion they think will grant them safety or status in the moment. This is why her remorse feels so hollow, because there is no consistent self behind the tears to actually anchor that remorse to. The world is obsessed because we're looking for a why. But when you peel back the layers of Mackenzie Shirilla, you don't find a deep, dark motive. You find a clinical emptiness, a void where empathy and self-awareness were supposed to be. That's the true hell on wheels, a high-speed life with nobody actually at the wheel of the soul. In our modern age, we've perfected the ability to curate a life of love, of grief, and empathy for an audience. That's social media. We can do whatever and manipulate whatever for the audience, all while potentially harboring a lethal level of narcissism offline. Mackenzie's case is a real eye-opener, and we are obsessed with it because she proves that a person can post a tribute to the very person they destroyed without a single spark of internal conflict. That's jarring. She represents our deepest fear, that we're losing the ability to tell the difference between a genuine human connection and a highly orchestrated performance of one. I want to leave you with this. When you look at Mackenzie's social media tributes posted after the crash, do you see a teenage girl struggling to process a trauma, or do you see a person simply finishing the performance of a lifetime? Does the mask ever truly come off, or is it just replaced by another one?